Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, and this podcast number 56. And I am delighted that you are joining me for my conversation with Mike Lawson, who is the publisher of School Band and Orchestra magazine, along with a couple of other magazines, Choral Director, Jazz Ed, and MMR, Musical Merchandise Review. Although not a household name in the band director community, Mike's work has been a positive influence in our profession. In addition to the magazines he produces, with no subscription fees, I might add, Mike has also played a major role in the TIME organization, the Technology in Music Education organization. And for any of you that were impacted by COVID and were forced to teach remotely, well, we know that it was technology that saved us. Mike has a very interesting story and a very powerful message, and it's one that I know you're going to enjoy. And I'm going to be right back with my conversation with Mike Lawson right after this.
This is Drew with thepodcastingstore.com, your one-stop shop for everything podcasting and remote learning, and a proud sponsor of Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Listen to what we've been working on in this clip from our podcast. I wanted to talk about something a little different today. If you only know me from the podcasting store, then you're only getting part of the story. The podcasting store is our electronics and broadcast equipment part of the company, but the other company that we have is Boomer Music Company here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And as part of what we do with that, which is all band and orchestra, I've been volunteering lately at a middle school with their beginners and saw that there was a really big need for reinforcing the basic lessons. So over on the Boomer Music Company YouTube channel, we have created a series of absolute beginners videos. These are short videos that reinforce what the beginner has already learned in class, but may not have fully absorbed. And the goal is to minimize lost practice time between classes so the player can maintain enthusiasm and learn faster. And so the first couple of lessons are going to involve things like opening the case, assembling the instrument, lubrication, and stuff like that. So we're adding more videos to that series all the time, but this could be a valuable resource for those of you who are teaching beginners. So go to the Boomer Music Company YouTube channel. Please subscribe, of course, and check that out. And if that could be of value to you, please use them in whatever way you see fit. Please visit thepodcastingstore.com, your one-stop shop for everything podcasting and remote learning. This is Drew with thepodcastingstore.com. Now back to Charlie.
Every once in a while in this profession of being a music educator, you run across somebody that you develop a nice working relationship with, and they become a friend, and you really don't ever get to spend any personal time with them because all of your communications or dialogue, I guess, happens in phone calls and emails and letters and things like that. And that's the case with our guest today. And he's a guy that I've come to watch his work and respect his work, and he's been just great for me. I'm an educational member of the Music Achievement Council, and one of my responsibilities there is to provide a couple of articles a year for a magazine that this young man is the editor. And I guess there's some new news that we're going to share during this podcast, but he's Mike Lawson. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Having me. I appreciate being here. This will be a lot of fun.
Well, it's going to be great, buddy. You know, Mike, you're probably not a household name in the music teacher community, but I'm sure everyone has seen, and hopefully I know they've benefited from the fruits of your labor with the work over the couple of years, many years, I guess, in the publishing world. And I want to talk with you about that in just a couple of minutes, about your work in publishing and your latest endeavors and things like that. But let's start with Mike Lawson and how music became a part of your life.
As a little kid, I loved to sing, and growing up in the 70s, there was nothing cooler than, rock bands playing guitar. So I joined choir right at the earliest elementary school opportunity, sang in choirs in church and in school. A friend's father uh, taught me my first guitar chords. Me and two of my buddies got guitars. I was 8, they were 9, they were and 10. I'm the only one who really learned. But one of their fathers, who was the director of the boys club, sat me down with a sheet of notebook paper and had me draw 6 lines, and then 6 more lines and 6 more lines and 6 more lines. And then he showed me how to draw the chords C, A minor, F, and G. And he said, here, take that home. And when you can play those, come back and I'll show you more. And then he showed me how they go along to something like All I Have to Do Is Dream by the Everly Brothers. And I was enthralled, and I went home and I just practiced and practiced and practiced off that piece of paper. And I grew up a very disadvantaged child economically, and so music was to me a possible ticket out of where I was in life. And but I had some great teachers then. Henrietta Sullivan at Lucille Moore Elementary School, may she rest in peace, I'm sure, because she must have been born in the 20s. Um, Helped me book my first gig when I was in 6th grade, and I just knew music was, I love it. I've always loved it. And singing in choir was free vocal lessons for me. That's how I looked at it. Even if I wasn't a huge fan of the repertoire, I knew what I was getting because I wasn't getting free guitar lessons.
So was music in your family at your home? Did you hear a lot of it?
No, my dad played WSM radio country music out in his workshop or in his car. My parents did not own a real radio or stereo. I got the first one in the house. And, in the 70s, we didn't have all the distractions kids have today. So we listened to records or we played sports. And I wasn't very good at sports, but I loved listening to records, and I had a natural curiosity from it. So I spent, a good deal of my time spending all of my allowance or yard work or errand money on buying records.
So who are you listening to?
Well, early on, I was sneaking in albums by Alice Cooper and David Bowie and Kiss and all of these groups, that my mother was just appalled by. And what she did, which was probably one of the best things she could have done for me without realizing it, is she bought me a bunch of cutout bin Sha Na Na albums. And Sha Na Na, of course, was, they played at Woodstock and had that TV show in the 70s, but they were 1950s revival rock and roll and doo-wop music. And to me, that was the beginning of rock and roll, which was only 25 years old at the time, right, as a genre. So I was listening to a lot of quote oldies, and it allowed me to have a couple of epiphanies because my first chords taught to me were 1, 6, 4, 5, C, A minor, F, and G. I recognized the pattern in these 50s songs, half of the Sha Na Na albums. I'm like, that's the same chords to Tears on My Pillow. That's the same chords to Silhouettes on the Shade. And suddenly I had a repertoire, right? I didn't have to learn new chords. I had to play them at a different tempo and sing different words to them. It was that's kind of who I was. It was a weird combination. And of course the Beatles, that was what goes without saying.
So did you continue choir in high school? And suffice to say, you probably never played in band then.
Well, I tried to play in band in the 7th grade. And the problem was that first of all, I had already been playing guitar since just before I turned 9, and I was fairly proficient at it. And I never got real guitar lessons until a catalog came in the mail from Gulf Coast Community College offering bluegrass beginner guitar lessons. And it was $25 for 8 weeks for 2 nights a week, 3 hours a night. And that was the only lessons my dad was going to pay for because they were cheap and it was music he didn't hate. But I did try to do the band in 7th grade, but I'd already been playing guitar for 4 years at that point and was pretty good at it. So we got me a saxophone. I did summer band. I did a first semester of marching or whatever beginner band would be. And I just was frustrated because the embouchure building that up was painful. And when you're a kid, your patience level's not there. And knowing that I could go, when the saxophone frustrated me trying to learn it, I'd put it down, pick up my guitar and play full songs. And so I left it alone.
Yeah.
To skip ahead of myself a little bit though here, I had a horrible, situation in those years. My family life was really bad. And my parents divorced. I ended up in failing the 7th grade, and they put me into what was one of the first alternative schools in the country in our city. And I made up the 7th, 8th, and 9th in one grade. So they put me in high school a year ahead of myself. And I found out they had a stage band that had guitar players. And I was absolutely just enchanted by this idea. So I went in and auditioned. I'm 14 years old. I'm a year ahead of myself. The band director didn't know how old I was. Forgot to mention it was supposed to be for juniors and seniors only. I was going into 10th grade. I whipped all of the other kids that auditioned because I knew my chords and I knew how to play big band songs. And I understood a lot of the progressions actually from Sha Na Na because different swing tempo, but similar progressions. So I was in stage band, jazz band, as you call it these days. We weren't allowed to call it jazz band back then in the Deep South. So I did do that. And I performed in performing arts band in the year after, which is the pop band that goes with the choir. So I stayed with choral all of my life from kindergarten through my end of my high school career. And I did jazz band on guitar and stage band with the choral.
So where did life take you after high school?
Funny thing about high school, one day I was down at the music store and a guy said, I grew up in Panama City Beach, Florida, lots of bars to play music in, lots of places to do live performance. And I thought all of these guys playing these clubs were rock stars. And that's all I wanted to do in my life was set up my gear and play for tours. I thought it would be a great way to have a life. One day I'm down at the music store and a guy comes up and says, hey man, our guitar player just bowed out for Saturday. You know all these songs? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, can you sub? And I'm like, yeah. I didn't really know what that meant, but I showed up and I did the gig and I got paid $50 and everything changed after that for me. I started playing gigs in high school on school nights and other stuff and things. My school career diminished quickly. So I ended up taking my GED at 16 and going out and performing with top 40 bands and playing in clubs all over, the state of Florida. That's where it took me. And I really wanted to go to college, but at 15, as my parents were divorced and everything was falling apart, here I am a year ahead of myself in school. I'm in the jazz band when I shouldn't be because I'm not old enough and not of high enough rank and grade. And I'm going to Gulf Coast College taking 2 courses, on a path to college. But, my home life disrupted all of that. And my ticket out was music. And I had a way to make money. And you know what? $50 a night in 1984 was a lot of money.
So you didn't go to college like most people go to college for a 4-year degree. You were on the road playing in bands.
People say, where'd you go to college? I say all of them. I played the frat houses and the entire Southeast Conference. I could tell where I was going to be looking at the football schedules and know there's a home game in Tuscaloosa, so we'll be playing the SAE house that week, and then the next night we'll be down in Ole Miss, and then we're gonna have to crisscross back to Auburn. And yeah, I wanted to go to college. I didn't have the opportunity. I didn't have the funding. I did not have the parental support and all of the things that are really so critical to that. So I missed out on that. And I would love to have had that experience. So instead, I entertained the kids that got to go.
So how many years were you doing the band gigs on the road before you tried your hand in the publishing world?
So from 1984, underage, playing bars. Funny story, Charles. I couldn't celebrate my 21st birthday because I've been playing in bars for 6 years, and if people knew how old I was, I could probably have been taken outside and beaten for playing and drinking beer in their bars underage for 5 years. So I played literally from, the age of 16 once I got my GED, and did that. That was from 84. So I did that solid through 1991. It's the only way I made a living. The publishing thing started when I moved to Nashville in 1991.
And what was the influence for doing that?
I had friends who had got a record deal and a publishing deal as a songwriter, and I thought, wow, I'd like to not only write songs but own some copyrights of other people, and maybe I could get involved in music publishing. I didn't know the first thing about it. Didn't stop me though. I had a child coming, my first child. I got married the year before, so get married in June of 90, and June 91, I have a child being born. So I moved to Nashville, opened an office at 30 Music Square West, the old RCA building. My first landlords were Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley, who, are just legends in this town. And I started off, I went and signed up companies with BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC, and I started talking to writers and pitching songs. And I only got a few things cut by a couple of writers I worked with. But I went to South by Southwest, and I met this guy who passed away last year, selling a contract library for musicians out of his backpack that he had printed up at Kinko's with a disc in the back for computers. Now, this is 30 years ago. Computers are really just beginning to show up in people's houses. But I thought, this is a great product. I'm a working musician, and here's all these booking contracts and record contracts and all these just different examples, templates, like 150, 175 agreements with a simple install program and a text library. And I said, man, this is great. We should make this a real product, not something you sell out of your backpack. I went home to Nashville, and in my office building upstairs was my now departed dear friend, Steve Moore, who was an attorney, entertainment law attorney. His father was a surgeon down in Meridian, Mississippi. They angel invested me $10,000, and I published my first product.
Wow.
I didn't know anything about it, but I knew that there was a need. And I sold a lot of those. A lot. So it was just a strength that became something in identifying a need for people like me. And that's kind of what I've done my whole publishing career.
And you were still performing during this time?
I've never stopped performing.
You're still performing today then?
Yes. I'm making records, and I'm a musician, man. I'm a lifelong music maker.
I love it. I love it.
From elementary school, and will continue until I can no longer do it.
Well, in 1992, you created a thing called the Music Industry Forum on CompuServe, and boy, that dates you. Just that word CompuServe will date you. But it was a first music digital download platform. So how did all that transpire?
Well, I had the software business, right? And the only tech support calls we got were not from Macintosh users. They were from people running MS-DOS. And I didn't know anything about MS-DOS, and I didn't know anything about the emerging thing called Windows. So I ran down to Office Depot and I bought a PC clone, and it came with a CompuServe install disk. So, what is this? And I installed it. I need a modem. So I went and bought a modem, and I hooked it up, and I was fascinated by this. I'd heard about bulletin boards, but I didn't really know what this was. And of course, CompuServe was much bigger than the regular bulletin board. And I installed it and I started looking around, and they had a MIDI music forum where people were sharing MIDI files of things they had composed themselves or arranged from themselves. And I had an epiphany. Wow, this would be so powerful for musicians. Just like when I saw the software product, I went, we should be using this to have record labels and musicians sharing sound bites of songs and downloading tour schedules and bios and discographies and photos and having live interview sessions. There's so much we can be doing with this. So within a month, I was in Columbus, Ohio, pitching this idea to the vice president of CompuServe, who looked at me and said, you know, CompuServe's traditionally been for hardware and software support and email sharing with corporations. I don't really understand what that has to do with the music business. So, you know, after some convincing, we got the forums open, long story short. So that's how that happened. It was, again, you know, just an epiphany moment.
So you're one of the guys responsible for Spotify and Apple Music and all that stuff here a whole bunch of years later.
You know, in a strange way, 30 years ago, I was running around Nashville like, you know, John the Baptist before he got his head cut off, saying, prepare the way, this is coming. And it terrified the music industry. And it was a badge of honor back then for A&R guys and label executives to say, I don't know anything about computers. My secretary does that. And I'm like, you guys don't even understand. I mean, I literally had to tell them what email was, you know, and how someday you will not use your phone. You will use this method to communicate. And they just looked at me like a deer in the headlights. But fortunately, there were a few that got it, but they were willing to turn the hard work over to me and participate. So I sat in my house with a boombox connected to an SX 286 computer or 386 computer, SX25, with a very primitive sound card, and they sent me boxes of new CDs. And I sat down and found the best 30 seconds from each one, and I recorded in 8-bit 11K mono audio files, cataloged them, and then would set my computer around 1 a.m. to start uploading all of these sound bites. So, you know, I don't want to sound like the Little Richard of downloading, you know, like they stole it all from me, but I did create the first 30-second downloadable sound bites. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Well, you've been working your way through the music industry, and you've been focusing on technology a lot. I mean, you got a great, no, pardon the expression, book on what you've done with technology in music and music education. And you create a lot of resources to do that. You're involved, and I know in time and all that sort of thing. What's the void you're trying to fill here? You know, is it that musicians, music teachers really don't understand how technology can benefit them?
No, I'll back up just a hair on that a little bit also, because so when I left, I sold my company. I sold the software rights to Mix Magazine. I worked for Gibson for a little bit, and I put them on CompuServe, and the Netscape browser came out. And then I led this panel of college kids into building the first online site for a guitar maker. And it was very robust and huge. Around my third year into that, I got recruited to go to San Francisco and start a book company for Mix Magazine, the people who had bought me, called Mix Books. And the reason I jumped on it, Charlie, is that the ADAT was introduced, and it was a super VHS cassette format, 16-bit 44.1 digital recording system that suddenly put digital home recording studio quality in the hands of the masses who could spend $2,000 on a tape deck. It was a revolution. And I saw that and all of the cottage products that jumped up around it. And I went, wow, people are going to need to know how to use this. And I want to know how to use this. Remember, I'm a musician, right? So I need to know too. So I jumped at the chance to take the book gig. I moved to San Francisco, and I started finding experts. who can write great books on mixing, microphones, using ADATs, all of the things that go with it. Because by publishing those, I also taught me. So there's my education, hiring and signing writers who wrote authoritative works on it. And I had to read them because I was publishing them. So in 1997, I find out about Time, which was still in its infancy. And I called up Tom and John Dunphy and Tom Rudolph. And I said, you guys don't know me, but I absolutely love this. The origins of Time really were a bunch of guys who saw that music enrollments were dwindling in traditional music programs. And they were concerned for the future of their programs and for the future of music education.
And we should say that Time is technology. I'm sorry, technology in music education, correct?
That is correct. ti-me.org. So they called me, and I was just absolutely enthralled by the concept that music teachers could have recording studios, MIDI labs, keyboard labs, all of this stuff that would take a kid like me and give him an extra reason to want to come to school. Like I remember saying to them, if you had had teachers like you and that gear around when I was in high school, I might have had a different path in life. I might have decided it was more important to show up in school and study than to go play that gig with those old guys at that grizzled bar that night, which I don't regret, but so I called them up and said, look, I want to help out. I love what you're doing. And their original vision was to do this because when they created non-traditional music programs, they have waiting list of kids. Now, as a school administrator, you know that when enrollments are down, funding starts going down, right? And so, they had to protect the future of music education. If kids stop signing up for concert banners or choral or whatever programs are offered, then administrators start going, that's less interesting to us to fund. So this was really a self-preservation scheme by these brilliant college professors on top of the vision they had for modernizing the way that traditional music is taught, not to teach technology, but to teach music with the modern tools other than chalkboards and wetboards. So that's how I got involved with them. I called, so I want to be involved. So that summer at the Summer NAMM show, I joined the advisory board and I started helping them publish the first few books that they had put out under the Time banner.
And what year was that?
That was 1997.
And you're still involved with Time?
Yeah. So about 10 and a half years ago, they were looking for a new executive director. And I was like, boy, that would be a lot of fun. At the time, I had been involved with the Grammy organization. I was on chapter board of governors in San Francisco. I was a national trustee for the Grammys. I was on their awards and nominations committee and finance committee and all this stuff. So I understood, nonprofit work and the inner workings of nonprofits on a huge level. But I loved the mission of Time. I did then, I do now. And I jumped at the chance to come in, and they were having some troubles. So it took me a couple years, but man, have we turned that thing around. And it is just a joy to be a part of it these days.
So then comes along an opportunity to join the editorial staff of Timeless Communications, which is where you headed up magazines like School Band and Orchestra and Choral Director and Jazz Ed, and I'm sure there was others in there. So what was the motivation then to move you into the magazine business?
Well, so that started back when I made the software also. All roads lead to Rome, don't they? In 1992, when my software came out, I went to South by Southwest to help promote it again. And I was in a booth next to a fellow named Terry Lowe, who was working for a company that sold touring directories. And we became friends. And then when I went to work at Mix, there he was working at Mix selling ads. And so we've been friends a long time. So with Mix Books, I ended up buying that in 2000, forming Artist Pro Publishing, a very robust online educational site with free courses for people on audio production. And I had huge Grammy-winning producers and engineers like Al Schmidt, Joe Ciccarelli, Alan Parsons, some great people giving free advice to people who would join the site, which was free and ad supported. I sold that company to Thompson Learning in 2004. So I went out to work for it, bought it, formed my own business. 5 years later, flipped it to a publicly traded company, hated working for them. Uh, Went and worked with Hal Leonard for a couple of years and published a new series for them. The last thing I did for them was sign Quincy Jones, or lead the signing of Quincy Jones to his book, Q on Producing. And then worked for Alfred for about 7 years and published another 45 titles with them on audio production and music technology. And books were starting to fade. You know, the success of books was changing. When I started Mixed Books, I could print a new edition or a new book on microphones or mixing, and I could expect to sell 5 or 6,000 the first 2 months, and then watch sales, you know, kind of mellow out and then hit a nice steady thing. And it was almost like printing money. We had Borders, we had Barnes and Nobles. Amazon came along and was selling the books at wholesale, which really hurt retailers. Retailers shut down, right? Do you have many Barnes and Nobles locations left? No, Borders is completely gone. So that world changed, and the book business just changed. And so Terry Lowe, who is a magazine publisher of his own publications, Front of House and Projection Lighting and Staging News, he wanted to own MMR, Musical Merchandise Review. And to get it, he had to buy school band and orchestra, choral director, and jazz ed in the package. So I ran into him at Summer NAMM, 6 months after he bought them. And I walked up and I said, you know, I've been real involved with time. You know, I've published a lot of books that ended up becoming textbooks or required reading. I have a heart for music education. I'm not a band director or choir teacher, but you know what? I was their student. And I think if you ever need any help with these, Terry, just give me a call. And I left it at that. And I think it was maybe 16, 18 months later, he called. I said, I'd love to do this. And that's how I ended up with the job.
And that's led to some recent news.
Yeah. Announced yesterday, I purchased all 4 of those magazines. So I'm back in the publishing business. The name Artist Pro Publishing was abandoned by Thompson, 10 years after they bought me, and they exited that business. So I reclaimed the names and trademark and URL initially so that I could help the previous authors get their rights back and republish with other publishers or self-publish, because I was getting out of that world. And so Terry made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so now I own all the magazines, and I'm back in the publishing game under Artist Pro Publishing.
So as a publisher and formerly as an editor who had a responsibility for those magazines, you know, what's been your vision for them? And especially, you know, the 3 that are focused towards the music teachers, you know, the SBO, choral director, and jazz ed. What do you want them to do?
What I want them to do is inspire teachers to create and maintain amazing music programs that give kids who are lovers of music a reason to get on that bus every morning and go to school. That's at the end of the day what I'm after. I want them, we're going back to who I was as a kid. I want them to nurture the hidden talents and the potential talents and develop them of the students who were like I was, and set them on a lifelong path of making music. That's the ultimate 10,000 foot perspective on what the goal is with the magazines and why I wanted them. And frankly, you know, the concept of a guy like me, who I guess you could call a high school dropout since I took the GED, and aced it, by the way. But I think what I love the most is, I get to write an editorial every month for the last 6.5 years, telling teachers my opinion. And I used to get in so much trouble for that when I was a student.
And why
And
was that? Why'd you get in trouble?
because I gave them my opinion and they didn't always want to hear it, and it wasn't always appropriate of me to have done so. But
So,
now I get to pontificate, and I enjoy it. I have a heart for what they taught me, and so I try to be very helpful. But I do enjoy the irony of it.
so what's one of those things that you went out on a limb and said, this is what you guys are missing or need to do that got the biggest knee jerk reaction?
Embracing kids who want to be musicians, but who did not see themselves in a path to becoming teachers. So when I grew up in the 80s, if you expressed an idea, the early 80s, if you expressed that you wanted to do music for a living and that it wasn't a path to education and potentially becoming an educator, you really were not taken very seriously by the teachers, at least the ones I had. And I've heard that from other, people where, well, yeah, my teacher, once they found out I wanted to play rock and roll or I wanted to do this or that, they just kind of paid attention to the other students that they knew were going on to, Troy State University to study the band program and fought and maybe be their assistant band director or conductor or director one day. So that's one of the big things was like, hey, all music is good. We all have our genre preferences, but a kid's inspiration toward making music their lifetime should be nurtured no matter what their intentions are to do with it. And that's my philosophy on it anyway, because I did go on, in spite of, a few negative experiences, to playing music with some pretty big rock stars, and serving on the Grammy Awards and doing things that probably, I could never have dreamed of doing at the time. So my big message, in that regard has always been take them all seriously. And I think that's changed a lot. I don't think the teachers today are the teachers of 40 years ago in many respects. So, maybe that's not as much of an issue anymore, but, you work for a great school that turns out music educators. So you must have seen a little of that attitude yourself over the years.
Yeah, the attitude that I always saw and it really bothered me was that so many teachers think that when a kid enrolls in music the first time, they start playing a violin or they start playing a trumpet or something, that it becomes a life sentence, that they have to do this every year of school and they have to. And then they take it as a personal affront if the kid drops out or they're looking for different tricks and techniques to keep the kid involved. And I learned a lesson from my wife a long time ago. My wife was a home economics teacher. And she never came home from school and said, man, I want this kid to be a professional cook, or I want this kid to become a professional clothing designer. All she wanted that kid to do at the end of the day was to be able to, boil water and cook himself a meal and sew on a button and iron a shirt and do those kinds of things, balance the checkbook and stuff like that. And the thing was, if you give those kids a great education, you give them a great experience, and that's what you've been talking about, give them a great experience, they'll continue playing and singing and participating in music, right? And that needs to be the focus of teachers. So I love this this focus that you have to inspire the kids to keep them going.
Well, thank you. And because I get asked all the time, well, how'd you end up at SBO or choral director? Are you a former teacher? And I'm like, no, I was the student, and I know what I wish I'd been taught. And I'm not arrogant in content. All right. I don't write the columns. I do interviews, but I don't write the columns. I'm not the expert. No more than when I ran the book company. I wasn't an expert in mixing and microphones but I knew how to find them and identify them and give them a voice. So that's really what my strengths have been in publishing, is finding experts who have information that I find fascinating and need to know, think others will need to know, and to make sure they have a really good voice uh, and vehicle to spread that with.
So then what makes a good article, Mike? I mean, what are there some key ingredients that you look for when you're deciding on whether something's worthy of being published?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, will it help the readers be a better teacher to a kid like me? That's the highest bar right there. When someone has an article suggestion, or I have an idea for an article, I'm looking for a writer, it always is measured by, is this going to help that educator be a better teacher to the Mike Lawson who drug his guitar to school every day, even when he didn't have a guitar program to play it in, so he could play it at lunch break, right? That's number first and foremost. The articles need to encourage. I look for articles on advocacy. I look for articles on motivation. I look for articles that are inspirational. I want articles that help them recruit and retain students again into becoming lifelong music makers. In some situations, I'm looking, is the article socially relevant? Does it address a social need that needs to be talked about? And there are a lot of those, whether we're talking about, kids developing identities, or whether we're talking about things like racial issues or historical issues where I was taught songs that were kind of minstrel songs growing up in the 70s. Are they still culturally relevant? I'm not the expert, but you know what, I want to give some teachers a voice to discuss some of those controversial things on either side of an issue. And I'm not trying to manipulate socially, but if people have opinions, I'll publish them. And at the end of the day, those things do they help right or wrong? If there was a practice that was wronging kids or programs and educational processes that at the end of the day resulted in kids not wanting to be lifelong music makers, does this article help right or wrong? That's really kind of the top level stuff that I look for. And on top of that, I want to honor great teachers. I love doing up close stories, interviews, and letting teachers tell their stories. I love that because they go back to their administrator and say, look, I got honored. And their administrator goes, wow, that's cool. And sometimes the local news will call me from their hometown in, the middle of Montana, because they're going to do a local story about the band director who's been there through a difficult time and kept that band going and only had, this to work with. And now he's being honored by a national magazine. That's the kind of feel good stuff that, makes me do this every month. I absolutely love doing that.
And you do the 50 directors who make a difference. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that one the magazine's been doing for 22 years, and I've done it since I took over, with the exception of the COVID year, because we didn't have any schools then. It was a really weird year. That's a whole different topic. But yeah, that's the coolest thing, because you think about over the 20 years of that being published, that's a thousand band directors who got honored in a national magazine. And those 1,000 band directors reached millions of kids, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Right. How many millions of those kids, what percentage of those were little Mike Lawsons? A lot of them. Not every kid that joins band, is enthralled with band or choir, especially in choir. They think it might be an easy A, and they have to take an elective. Or they join for the trip to Disney World or Universal. They join for the roller coaster. They join for the social experience. Those are really important. Student travel, social experiences are as critical a part of band programs, in my opinion, as learning the music, because that's what gets them in the door. The teacher has to hold them there, right? And I tell you what, if that's a way to get the kids in the door, then we should foster that. And I'm getting off topic here, and I apologize for that, but I do get animated and excited about it, because Charlie, I owe everything in my life to music teachers who believed me when I said I wanted to do this for real, and local music stores who got the right gear in my hands to help me do it. And I've had a really good life, uh, rising out of poverty, and like I said, playing with rock stars and people I never dreamed about meeting. And it started with, my elementary school general music teacher, Miss Sullivan.
And I think, there's a lot more Mike Lawsons out there than every band and choir director realize. I mean, there's so many kids that are playing guitars, drums, keyboards and stuff. The garage band's going everywhere, and they don't have access to mainstream kind of music programs in the public schools. And we need to reach out to them. I think one of the coolest things I saw, and maybe you might have heard of this too. There was a guy by the name of Mike George, who was the executive director of the Wisconsin Music Association. And they took the state of Wisconsin and they made 4 different quadrants. And then they had groups submit their recordings for a garage band competition. And it was like the NCAA Final Four bracket. I mean, they just kept coming down, and they would have these recordings and playoff sessions and things like that. And then the winning group got to play at Summerfest in Milwaukee. And I just thought that was one of the coolest things to get kids excited about music that weren't in mainstream playing, And I think we need to do more of that in mainstream music education, is to reach out to those kids that are playing non-traditional band and orchestra instruments, let's say.
Well, it's one of the reasons I love what my dear friend David Wish has done with Little Kids Rock, because there are so many kids participating now in that who were never going to join traditional music programs, right? I talked to so many band directors and choir teachers who took up the modern band mantle in the last few years because of Little Kids Rock. And I always ask them, does this compete with marching, concert, symphony, jazz, any of your other programs? He goes, no, these kids would never be part of them. So I love doing this because I'm getting a whole other group of kids who otherwise would not be making music. And kids, who are doing that are a different type of student. They want to perform in a different way. At the end of the day, it's music, and music makes you smarter, and music gives you opportunities, and it gives you hope and joy and allows you to express yourself, and so many benefits, so I'm really encouraged by seeing the whole modern band kind of thing you're talking about there emerge, because again, that's a carrot on a stick for a little Mike Lawson to want to get on that school bus in the freezing cold at 7 a.m. And I'll tell you, if I had been a little kid and there'd been a Little Kids Rock or a studio or a MIDI lab or anything like that at school, that would not only have been the carrot for me, but if the teacher had said, hey, Mike, you know what? You're really good in the studio. You're really good at writing songs. Love that. But man, you're flunking science, math, and English.
So let's shift gears here a little bit with you, Mike. So I'm listening to the podcast, and I think I've got an idea for an article. What should I do?
Well, first of all, think it through. That's important. And then just go to any of our websites for SBOmagazine.com, JazzEdMagazine.com, or ChoralDirectorMag.com. Click submissions and send me the article. The best way to submit an article is in a plain Word file. Attach any images separately. Please don't embed them. No all caps anything. Don't try to lay the article out and make it pretty. That's what we do. Keep it to about 1,000 words a page. Take away 150 to 200 words for each image, depending on how big they run. Make sure there's a bio at the end, the short about the person and any link that you want, and submit it. Follow up with an email to me. You can it's real simple, mike@artistpro.com or mike@mmrmagazine.com. I'm the easiest guy to find out there. And let me know, because I'm always looking to give a voice to teachers. I love op-eds. I love commentaries. I love sharing tips and techniques and stories of other directors who inspired you. So I'm always looking for great ideas.
That's good. Okay, a couple final questions, Mike. We're coming out of the pandemic. And so what should be our takeaways? What have we learned? What should teachers have learned through all of this time, that year plus shutdown that we should be thinking about incorporating into day-to-day education?
Well, I'm gonna pivot to the Time Organization for a second on this because we have been building an ark, preparing for this rain for 25 years. And suddenly, teachers who really didn't give much thought to technology or thought that doesn't apply to me. I teach symphony. I teach, concert band. What do I need technology for? We suddenly became the triage go-to people last year and a half ago when it all shut down and they were forced with teaching over Zoom or whatever they could. Um, the biggest thing, because again, I'm not an educator, so you guys know what you learned and what you need to keep doing on that side of it. But from where I sit, I want to say tech is not going away. Keep your powder dry, right? It's gonna be needed again. You might not need it right away. You might have to teach hybrid. Keep working on those skills so that you understand connectivity of devices, so that you understand audio sound levels, how to edit a wave file, how to troubleshoot on the fly when your sixth grader's having trouble with his audio device. You've suddenly got to learn all that stuff and know all that stuff if you haven't learned it already, and you've got to retain it and keep it in practice. So that's what, I believe one of the biggest takeaways is from that side, because as far as pedagogy and lesson plans and all of that, wow, I've never seen a cooler bunch of teachers figure things out than music teachers over the last year. But when it comes to technology, this isn't a skill you can ignore anymore. And we give a lot of great opportunities for that, both online on the Time website, but at the OMEA, the TMEA, NISMA, and other state MEA shows, we give great sessions by some of the smartest people, music educators in the business. And I sure get a kick out of helping produce those and seeing those teachers come in and go, oh, that's how that works.
Yeah, since I started doing the podcast, it was a year in this past March that I've been doing it. And I didn't have a lot of technology experience. I mean, I'm a trumpet player, teacher, conductor, that kind of thing. And I just kind of jumped in. And one of the things I learned is that if you want to get good at something, jump in. You're not going to break it. You're not going to break technology, right? You're going to learn it. It's a lot of trial and error. And it becomes really, really cool things. I've been able to do some really wonderful things thanks to technology. So thanks for your leadership in this all, Mike. You've helped me out.
To learn what you had to learn than it is to build up an embouchure or learn to read music. So teachers shouldn't be afraid of this, and they shouldn't be a lot of the people we get coming to Time sessions are teachers 5 years away from retirement are going, oh Lord, I suddenly got handed a tray of Chromebooks or iPads and told to use them, and I don't know what to do, or I don't really know how technology applies to what I teach. And I go, well, you have an iPhone, there's a microphone you can hook to it, and you can just record sectionals, you can record rehearsals. Now you've integrated technology into the music classroom. See how easy that was? And they go, oh yeah, you're right. Which microphone would you recommend? And then got them hooked.
Because you'll never find the right microphone, right? Okay, a couple of last questions here. What's been your favorite musical moment throughout your life?
I was mentored by the late, great Merle Saunders. He taught Jerry Garcia from Grateful Dead how to play jazz standards and real music. And he took me under his wing when I moved to San Francisco. And Merle was an absolute angel, treated me like a son. His family are family to me. The last show that I did with him in front of, which was one of, I think, 6 or 7, was in front of, annually in front of about 30,000 people at the Haight Street Fair in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And on that stage, I'm performing with the drummer Narada Michael Walden, who, produced huge hits for the Pointer Sisters, played with Mahavishnu Orchestra. He played on Jeff Beck's Wired. He's on stage with me playing. And he's a dear friend now. the Tower of Power sax player, Skip Mesquite, is playing sax. Merle's up there. Vince Welnick, my late friend from Grateful Dead and the Tubes, he's up there playing. That is just one of the shining moments, and it got captured on video. You can actually find on YouTube Hate Street Fair 2001 full performance and see me at 30 years old with 30 something years old with brown hair and a brown beard and looking so happy to be there and trying not to suffer from imposter syndrome.
Is there one musician along the way that you wish you'd had the opportunity to perform with?
George Harrison.
And why is that?
George seemed to me to be the coolest Beatle. I love his solo music. I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite Beatle. It really, really is, because I love the anger of John and I love the composition of Paul. But George just had this calm, cool demeanor about him, and his music was inspiring and spiritual and inventive in a lot of ways in his post Beatle career. And on top of that, he did the first benefit concert, the concert for Bangladesh, and brought in some of my heroes, Bob Dylan, Leon Russell, all these people to do that show. And I was a child when that happened, but when you're 10 years old and an album's 7 years old, that's not that old. So I grew up listening to all these great records from the 60s and 70s and pop and rock. And that's one I wish I could have performed with. There's no doubt about that.
And if you could have had a conversation with somebody, whether it was in the music world or non-music world, who might that be? And what do you want to talk about?
Well, I don't want to go without mentioning the two Bobs in my life. One I knew very well, which was Bob Welch from Fleetwood Mac, and he was a huge solo artist when I was a child, and we were very good friends until his passing. But so I had all these conversations with him, so I was very fortunate there. But someone I have not met would be Bob Dylan. I'm a little afraid to meet him because half of the time when I've met some of my rock star idols, their feet have been made of clay and they weren't really as nice as I thought they'd be. And the other half of the time, they're like extremely down to earth and great people. So you just never know what you're getting. And the bigger an idol is, the bigger the letdown if they're not the person you think they'd be. Dylan, on the other hand, is someone I'd like to sit down with and talk about songwriting and poetry and his musical influences, which are just vast, his journey, and reflect back without boring him on how his life's work influenced mine.
That's great. Well, Mike, I'm just so excited for your new venture here with the magazines that you're going to be taking on. And if there's any way that I can help along the way, I know I got an article coming due for SBO in the month of July, and I'll get that to you. But I just think it's great, and I really appreciate all you have done for us teachers in the field, and keep up the good work, buddy. But hope to see you soon.
I sure appreciate you. Thank you for having me on.
Mike Lawson is a guy who has done a lot and continues to be a positive influence in the music education world through his work at SBO, Choral Director, Jazz Ed, and MMR magazines, and with the Time organization. He is determined to help people provide content and programs that will help teachers inspire their students. As he said, to get them to want to get on the bus and go to school every day. And shouldn't that be the goal of every teacher? To inspire kids to the point that they simply can't wait to get back to school? Mike, keep up the great work and best of luck. Keep on inspiring us to inspire others. I can't think of a more noble calling. Well, that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Please continue to tell your colleagues and friends about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. I'll be back with more great conversations, but until then, this is Charlie Mangini saying, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.